Like putting the fox in charge of the henhouse. So Ireland has a new national plan against racism, announced yesterday by everybody's favourite communist who masquerades these days as a Green Party member, Captain Haddock. I mean Joe O'Brien, a government minister so utterly steeped in modern critical race theory and progressive thought that he doesn't think the concept of white privilege is in any way racist or harmful.
Minister, as you know, many of the so-called anti-racist NGOs which your department funds promote the idea of white privilege, the idea that all white people are inherently privileged because of their skin colour. Isn't that a racist idea in and of itself, and is this a good use of taxpayer money?
I disagree. I don't think the concept of white privilege is a racist concept.
How is it not racist? I mean, if you were to say, make a broad brush generalisation about any other racial group and say all black people are inherently privileged, for example, you would say that's an offensive statement, I presume.
I suppose white privilege talks about power and who's got the power in a society as well.
Yes, folks, as you can clearly see, the poison of critical race theory has already infected even the highest echelons of the Irish government. So we're off to a good start already. But enough of Captain Haddock, Joe O'Brien. Let's turn our attention back to the lady of the hour, Eben Joseph, Ireland's new racist finder general. Having moved to Ireland in the early 2000s, a microbiology graduate from that well-known bastion of good race relations and harmony, Nigeria, whose government are so enlightened and luminary that they've recently passed a law banning white people from advertisements. It seems she quickly cottoned on to the fact that we Irish like nothing more than a good old dose of self-flagellation. And now that the Catholic Church had disintegrated, there was a gap in the market, despite having no colonial past, no history of having owned slaves ourselves. In fact, having been for much of our history oppressed, downtrodden, starved, beaten, and murdered, she was also acutely aware that there was an appetite deep somewhere in the Irish psyche to atone for sins, even if we hadn't committed them.
You can't be a pilot without being taught how to fly a plane. It's the same thing. You cannot become an anti-racist by osmosis, just by hanging around people. You have to learn it. So you have to be taught to become an anti-racist.
Well, there you have it, folks. Because we Irish were never taught, one presumes, by a luminary like Eben Joseph not to be racist, we must be racist by default. And as if that wasn't all bad enough, it seems our whole educational system is flawed and dysfunctional.
So the narrative we've had about black people is that they are substandard, they are subhuman, it's a deficit. And so we need to go back there and change the narrative. And the only way we can do it is through our education system.
Well, let me just stop you there. At the risk of outing myself as a card-carrying member of Ireland's KKK, I was part of the educational system in the 70s and 80s. Yes, despite what you may have heard, I did actually go to school. And I can tell you from personal experience, there was no narrative about black people. There was no black people. It's not something we talked about. It wasn't on the tip of everybody's tongues. It just wasn't a thing. Full stop. The only black people most of us knew were Phil Lynott of Thin Lizzy fame and Lenny Henry, who we saw on the telly occasionally. There was no hatred of black people. There was no talk about black people. There was no bad thoughts about black people. There just was nothing. I myself didn't see a black person in real life until I was 15 years old. Not because I was avoiding black people, there just wasn't any.
We must unlearn all of those stereotypes, because that is how we learn white supremacy. Our education system is actually teaching us white supremacy.
Well, there you have it, folks. According to Eben Joseph, Ireland's education system is actually teaching white supremacy. Who knew? In an interview for Hot Press magazine, she was quick to jump on the bandwagon of George Floyd and the whole BLM situation, accusing Irish people of, quote, kneeling on the necks of black people. She also went on to say that Ireland, quote, became white on the backs and necks of Africans, and that we are now wallowing in, quote, white privileges. As if that wasn't enough, she said, the racism we experience is of the worst kind. She said that Ireland is far worse than even in America KKKA, where at least black people can become president, company CEOs, cops and drug dealers, and claims that the fact that Ireland doesn't have many reported incidents of racism is actually an indication of how oppressive we are. Well, now that she's been appointed by the government as the racist finder general, I think all that may be about to change. Then there's the small matter of the Ribena incident. Yes, I know what you're probably thinking. How could Ribena be in any way connected to systemic racism? But like I said earlier, cometh the hour, cometh the woman. In December 2019, whilst out for a meal with her sons, she was served the wrong drink in a restaurant. Now, to you and I, this kind of thing happens all the time. You get the wrong drink, you get the wrong food, why sometimes you even get the wrong bill. To most normal, sane people, you quietly mention it politely to one of the staff. Everything is usually put to rights double quick. No harm, no foul. But not to Miss Joseph. No, this was an act of outright racism. She had ordered red wine and was served Ribena by mistake. Why, this was outrageous, and to Eben Joseph, quite obviously an act of outrageous racism. And although the unfortunate restaurant manager apologised profusely and gave complimentary wine to in some way atone for this terrible mistake on behalf of the waitress, she insisted on taking to social media to castigate the restaurant and its staff, branding the unfortunate waitstaff who happened to make such an absolutely outrageous error as a sick joker or racist. She then went on to encourage more black people to go and eat at this establishment. Now, why she would seemingly be trying to drum up even more trade for this supposedly racist establishment is unclear. But then, according to Ms. Joseph, I've been educated in an education system that's taught me nothing but white supremacy, so I couldn't possibly comprehend a concept such as this. But I'm nothing if not always eager to learn from my previous mistakes. Has Miss Joseph perhaps any advice, any guidance, any tips for a broken sinner such as I? How should a person with as much white privilege as, say, I have, someone who's used to having their knees on the necks of black people, how should I deal with the black community, with black people in general?
Remember that, when people share their stories, it's not an invitation to white people to come and say, oh, yes, to challenge the story or to say, I don't believe you. No.
I see. So whenever a black person is speaking, I must be silent. I must listen attentively and believe whatever it is they say.
It's not an invitation to tell 20 other stories, of how, you went into a place when you were fat, or when you went into a place where where you were the only person. I'm like, So
I should not interject. I should not speak about any issues I myself might be having, because that's of no consequences. That's white people's problems. That doesn't matter when you're speaking to a black person.
There is benefit in people of color, in black people telling their stories, but that there is massive benefit in you listening when they do. So the first thing in being allies or in doing this work or anti-racism is to just listen. It's to listen. It's to say, I don't understand this, but I believe you.
Right. I think I may just have it. When speaking or interacting with a black person, I, as a privileged white person, must immediately be quiet, listen attentively, do not interject, do not talk or mention anything about any stories or situations or problems I might have. And even if I don't understand what the black person is saying or telling me, I must tell them that I understand and I believe them wholeheartedly. Got it. Boy, I think finally I'm making some progress here in this whole race issue. But what of today? Let's fast forward to the present day and ask the question, is this systemic racism that we here in Ireland seem to have, according to Miss Joseph, is it getting better or is it getting worse? Any guesses for what she might think of that?
You've said in the past that racism is rampant in Ireland. Do you think it's getting worse? And if so, why?
It is getting worse. And thank you so much for inviting me here today. And it is getting worse.
Well, as the great Paul Joseph Watson might say, imagine my shock. But I think I'm going to defer to another black person on this matter and his solution for race issues in the modern day. But of course, his solution wouldn't make anybody any money, wouldn't line any pockets. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the great Morgan Freeman.
How are we going to get rid of racism until...
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace, you know me as Morgan Freeman.
But I'd just like to end on this. A little message to our newly minted racist finder general, Miss Eben Joseph. Speaking as an ordinary Irish person, Ireland is not and never was a racist country. How do I know that? Well, simply this. If we were as systemically racist as you constantly tell us we are, you wouldn't be here.